Srimad Bhagavatam is particularly written for people of this age. I forget the Sanskrit, but there's a very important verse which says, it's as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by knowledge, truth, and other religious principles. Those whose vision is clouded because of the dense darkness of ignorance will get light from this Purana. So Srila Vyasadeva, realizing that although he had expounded on many subjects throughout the Vedas, needed to almost summarize and provide a focus that even us dimwits in the age of Kali could somehow grasp the essence of the Vedic literature. Our life is short. Mostly our vision is clouded, and we'll get some perspective from this Bhagavad Puran. So it's recommended that we daily imbibe Srimad Bhagavatam, and that way our misgivings, our doubts will be cleared, and our love of Godhead will be awakened. Okay, so this is a slightly different meter than normal. I'm going to use the Brahma Samhita meter. Sotye brita kumaniti Sotye brita kumatinatmada ishwaro me Sotye brita kumatinatmada ishwaro me Yat pada padmam abhavaya bhajanti bhavya Yat pada padmam abhavaya bhajanti bhavya Mang srantavaham arayo ratino pyuvishtham Mang srantavaham arayo ratino pyuvishtham Na praharanyat anubhava nirasta chitta Na praharanyat anubhava nirasta chitta Sotye brita kumatinatmada ishwaro me That my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from my chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. And it was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. Please repeat. It was by his mercy only that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from my chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. And it was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. Purport, commentary by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. The Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is the object of worship both by impersonalists and by the devotees of the Lord. The impersonalists worship his glowing effulgence emanating from his transcendental body of eternal form, bliss and knowledge, and the devotees worship him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Those who are below even the impersonalists consider him to be one of the great historical personalities. The Lord, however, descends to attract all by his specific transcendental pastimes. And thus he plays the part of the most perfect master, friend, son, and lover. His transcendental relation with Arjuna was in friendship, and the Lord therefore played the part perfectly, as he did with his parents, lovers, and wives. While playing in such a perfect transcendental relation, the devotee forgets by the internal potency of the Lord that his friend or son is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although sometimes the devotee is bewildered by the acts of the Lord. After the departure of the Lord, Arjuna was conscious of his great friend, but there was no mistake on the part of Arjuna, nor any ill estimation of the Lord. Intelligent men are attracted by the transcendental acting of the Lord with a pure, unalloyed devotee like Arjuna. In the war field, scarcity of water is a well-known fact. Water is very rare there, and both the animals and men working strenuously on the war field constantly desire water to quench their thirst. Especially wounded soldiers and generals feel very thirsty at the time of death, And it sometimes so happens that for want of water one has to die unavoidably. But such scarcity of water was solved in the Battle of Kurukshetra by means of boring the ground. By God's grace, water can easily be obtained from any place if there is a facility for boring the ground. The modern system works on the same principle of boring the ground, but modern engineers are still unable to dig immediately wherever necessary. It appears, however, from the history as far back of the days of the Pandavas, that big generals like Arjuna could at once supply water even to the horses, what to speak of men, by drawing water from underneath the hard ground simply by penetrating the stratum with a sharp arrow, a method still unknown to the modern scientist. Srila Prabhupada ki Oma Jnana Timidantasya Jnanam Jana Salakaya Choksurun Militan Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master has kindly forced open my eyes with the scalpel of knowledge. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Well, this verse appears in some context which I might quickly summarize. Lord Krishna has now left, as it's described by Srila Prabhupada in the purport. Krishna comes to canvass us that we shouldn't rot here in the material world, where we can't actually fulfill our ambitions to enjoy. We come into this world believing that we can somehow make a life for ourselves independently of serving God. And this is an illusion. Krishna Buli Sai Jiva Nade Bhatyamuk Ata Iva Maya Tori Deya Sangsar Duk. Becoming averse to Krishna, becoming fascinated by material energy. We try to strive for happiness here, but actually all we achieve is misery. So Krishna comes and says, look, there's a whole other world where you can not only experience bliss, but you can have a loving relationship with me, which is actually the only method truly of fulfillment. Sense gratification may give us temporary relief from the miseries of the material world. It may scratch the itch, to use Prahlad Maharaj's metaphor, but it doesn't fulfill, because our dharma, our sanatana dharma, our constitutional nature is to be eternal servants of Krishna. Our pleasure is derived as a byproduct of giving pleasure to Krishna. When we try to achieve our pleasure independently, then it's frustrated. But by satisfying Krishna, all our own needs are taken care of. In the spiritual sky, we have all kinds of different relationships with Krishna. Many of them are pictured here. Here we see Krishna lifting Govardhana Hill, an extraordinary act. How can a young child lift a mountain? And we see all of the residents of Vrindavan. We see Nanda and Jashoda, we see the gopis, we see cowherd men, cowherd boys, cows, all struck with wonder. How is it our little friend Krishna is lifting a mountain? Or here we see Mother Jashoda. How can someone consider that they're the mother of God? In many conceptions of God, this idea that you can be his mother is unheard of, particularly in the Judeo-Christian concepts, which might be the host society many have been raised. God is a massive being, and the only legitimate emotions apparently are awe and reverence. In fact, much of the time he's presented as a fearsome God. You better watch your step, otherwise he'll strike you down with a thunderbolt. He's got a lot to do. You should petition him for everything that you require. Apparently, as Srila Prabhupada would sometimes coin the phrase, he's our order supplier. We have a shopping list of things that we need from God. Please organize a nice new car for me, a nice new house for me, good education for my children, good health. In fact, most of what goes on in the name of prayer is a shopping list. These are all the things I require from you. If you could just arrange everything. Apparently you're in charge, so we've come to you to arrange everything for our interest, our gratification. This is a very interesting idea, that God essentially is engaged in our service. And when those prayers go unanswered, or at least if we don't get the answer we want, as in he fails to deliver that education, that car, that house, that health, then we become less interested in God. Srila Prabhupada often used an anecdote about the German housewives who prayed for their husbands to return successfully from war, and when they didn't come back, they became atheists. What's the point of believing in a God who doesn't give me what I want? In fact, if you think about most atheistic arguments, it's largely, well, you know, if God's a controller and organizer, this creation's not a very impressive, you know, output. I mean, people suffer here. Kids suffer. Good people suffer. Clearly, either there is no God or he's such a lousy architect that his creation is, he's not worth worshipping. One famous atheist comedian, Stephen Fry, was asked, if you ever meet God, what would you say to him? I'd tell him off. This was his idea. I'd tell him off. And why have you inflicted pain on innocent living beings? Of course, we assume we've got the whole story. That child that's suffering, seemingly without any valid purpose or justification. This is not the beginning of the story. We've come in halfway through the film and we're criticizing someone who is taking an action without knowing the backstory, what that child did in some previous life. So anyway, this is our general issue in the material world, is that we think we've got the whole story. We think our vision is clean. We judge from that perspective. But actually Krishna is trying to awaken us to a different way of relating to him. Krishna is much more satisfied by love, the love of a mother, the love of a lover, the love of a friend, than by awe and reverence and petitioning. Actually, the devotee wants to render service. That's why Arjuna here is expressing regret. I engage Krishna in my service as my charioteer. How horrendous! But as it's described in the purport, to facilitate exchanges which are devoid of awe and reverence. Krishna engages Yogamaya, that bewilders the devotee into forgetting that this is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When Krishna lifted Govardhana Hill, later cowherd men said, yes, we helped him. We were lifting our sticks. And when Krishna killed Putana, Madhu Mangal said, yes, I was chanting the relevant mantras. I helped Krishna. He should be grateful to me actually for helping him in this dire situation. This is their concept. Sometimes the cowherd boys would fight with Krishna and Krishna would allow them to win because that was the loving exchange. And they would say, right, Krishna, now you have to carry me on your back. That's the victors should be carried. And they would quite happily step on Krishna with their feet to clamber up onto his back. No concept that, oh, I might be offending God here. We hear that the gopis, when approached by Narada, said, yes, if the dust from our feet cures Krishna's headache, doesn't matter if we go to hell, Krishna should have no headache. So these are extraordinary dealings. They confound our material conceptions of God. But God's much more interested in loving exchange. Iti driksha lilabe ananda kunde swagosham nimajantam akkapayantam. Tadi yeshita geshu. How does it go? Tadi yeshita geshu. Bhaktoi jitatvam puna prematastham satabriti bande. Krishna is much more interested in loving exchanges which are devoid of awe and reverence and filled with intimacy. We know we derive ourselves much more pleasure in that way. Like a high court judge may enter the courtroom and there's all kinds of protocols that everyone has to observe. Stand up when the judge enters. Shut up when he bangs his gavel. And if he essentially orders you to observe a particular ruling, then if you fail to observe that ruling, you may be in contempt of court. In other words, his word is law. You'll be thrown into jail. You'll pay a fine. It's very severe if you don't respect the judge's authority. But he's much more inclined to spend time with his kids. And they don't have awe and reverence. They don't stand up when he enters the room. They don't obey his every word. And he thinks that's a much preferable relationship, devoid of awe and reverence. So we all understand these things. Why would Krishna or God be any different? So in this particular context, Lord Krishna has come and displayed all these wonderful pastimes, but now it's time for him to return. In fact, if we remember the context for Krishna's appearance, right at the beginning of the 10th canto, or we might say Krishna book, which Srila Prabhupada wrote early on, Bhumi, Mother Earth, being distressed by the accumulation of armies by various power-hungry kings, petitions the Lord, can you do something about this? I'm worried that they're building up all of these armies. It's building up to maybe a mass slaughter or mass war. Can you come and relieve this burden, relieve this distress? And Krishna comes with that in mind. And of course the Battle of Kurukshetra, the famous battle where Bhagavad Gita is spoken, is Krishna's solution to ridding the world of this burden. Every single one of those armies were involved in that battle, and just a handful of people survived the battle. In fact, Krishna's entire dynasty happened to survive because Krishna chose not to engage many of them. Balaram refused to take part. Krishna refused to be a combatant. And although Krishna's armies may be involved, the Vishnu dynasty, Krishna's dynasty, was largely left living. So Krishna had another arrangement that they would wipe themselves out. All of these things are recorded in Srimad Bhagavatam. And then, his mission being complete, he left. And this is often considered to be where Kali Yuga begins, after Krishna's departure. Of course, there are several, it's not an exact moment, there is almost an overlapping margin between the yugas. Sometimes we say it's when Shringi cursed Parikshit. Parikshit is the grandson of Arjuna. That is the moment when Kali entered. In fact, it's described that because Parikshit was such a pious king, Kali couldn't enter. But Shringi, the proud son of a Brahmana, issuing an unjust curse out of pride, this is when Kali came. We often talk about, in the Judeo-Christian scripture, pride cometh before the fall. So pride is always a problematic emotion. When we're prideful, we assume grandiose things about ourselves, we make pronouncements about things, and we're often inviting the Lord and his agents to give us a good education. That education normally comes through some kind of suffering, some kind of embarrassment, some kind of fall. So Kali Yuga, the age of degradation, where moral principles are in decline, where people develop all kinds of nasty desires. This age is ushered in because of the pride of Shringi. But it's also described that when Lord Krishna left, that was the darkness entered the world. Krishna took all the religious principles with him, according to that verse I quoted earlier. The Pandavas, prior to Krishna's departure, at Krishna's instigation, had waged this war of Kurukshetra. This not only rid the world of the burden of these kings and their armies, but it gave us an opportunity to hear Bhagavad Gita. In this age, we're actually not so much philosophically inclined. We can generally see proportionately different parts even of our program. We could argue that we're the people who are most likely to be interested in Krishna's message. For the kirtan, for the prasadam, there's generally bigger numbers than during the class. That seems to be the way of it. And even during the class, most of us would observe, if it goes on a bit long, if the speaker doesn't tell enough stories or jokes, chances are they won't hold our attention, we'll drift off. If we're forced to read, oh my goodness, our ability to maintain concentration and imbibe the message is highly hamstrung. So this is a very unfortunate age. So Vyas, the author of the Vedas, seeing our hopeless condition, even though he'd written many literatures extolling all kinds of truths and instructions for living, thought, I'm going to have to write a few stories for these people. Mahabharata is actually a great story, and it's actually quite engaging. It turns out that stories are often a way to get across moral principles and complex ideas that we're less inclined to fall asleep during. We might feel a little bit more engaged. We might even not philosophically resist the ideas that are in stories, because our intellect doesn't feel like it needs to defend itself against a story. It's just a story. So through story, not that it's invented, these are real events, it's a real historical narrative, but through this intriguing drama, Vyas gets across many points that people in Kali can perhaps digest. And right at the most exciting part of that story, just before the big battle where everything has been building up to, Krishna takes Arjuna aside and speaks Bhagavad Gita. In 700 verses, the essential truths that we're meant to imbibe. When our attention is heightened, what will happen in the battle? Will Arjuna fight because it looks like he's about to back out? You know, it's like intrigue, like they have in the soap operas. It always ends on a cliff edge so that people will tune in next week. Well, this device is not new. It's not only the advertisers and the people after ratings that figured out this device. Somehow if you heighten people's attention, then you can slip in the message that you're really trying to get across. So Krishna is doing that. Bhagavad Gita, he may be speaking to Arjuna, but actually this is a message for everybody. Arjuna seems to be in a particular predicament. He's a warrior by nature. He suffered various injustices at the hands of his cousin brothers. His wife was practically disrobed in the assembly. He was robbed of his kingdom. He had every justification to want vengeance. Being a soft-hearted person, even as a Kshatriya, being a devotee, he didn't want to see great bloodshed. And he proposed to Krishna, I'm not sure this war is for me. Even if we win it, will it be worth all that suffering? What's going to happen to families when all the men have been killed? All the people that we might desire this kingdom will have been vanquished. I think I should just go to the forest and give it all up. Krishna said, well, I think your reasoning is mundane. You might speak all kinds of eloquent rationalizations, but you're actually lamenting out of the bodily concept of life and mundane reasoning. I think you should do your occupational duty, which is to protect people from harm, the innocent citizens, uphold dharma. Whether or not it suits you, you should do it for me, Krishna says. Give up your fruitive mentality, become my instrument, become my servant. I'm paraphrasing, obviously 700 verses, there's a lot more that's said besides that, but this was one of the lines of reasoning that Krishna imparted to Arjuna. And our situation is not dissimilar. We generally don't feel like doing our duty. It's generally full of inconvenience. It's not convenient to work hard often to sustain a family, and most people have, on the pretext of I should become renounced, given up their family life. Reneged on their duty. We have many broken families because people have argued in these kind of ways. Many children who have grown up somewhat damaged because they didn't have the love of both parents. Or even parents that may say, well, you know, my main focus is to serve in the temple. You kids, figure it out. You're probably just a hangover from my material conditioning. So many kids have grown up bereft of good parenting, which of course is an occupational duty. So all of us struggle to fulfill our occupational duties. People may rankle whether it's the occupational duties of a husband or a wife or of someone who should be engaged in the service of others or someone who should be an entrepreneur. There are so many different prescribed duties for all these different codes. So we are all in Arjuna's situation to some extent, maybe not so confronting that we're having to fight people on the battle, but all of us need to understand, discharge your prescribed duties, detach from your ambitions, your agenda, your needs, your interests. Do it as an offering unto me. This is the essence of varnashram dharma. And we can see, although devotional service transcends the principles of varnashram, it's not that we, in our immature state, can think that we have progressed beyond following varnashram codes. So, Arjuna and the Pandavas, Arjuna being the third son of Kunti, or actually the fourth son of Kunti, there was a secret son that no one knew of. The eldest being Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira became the emperor of the world, and the Pandavas ruled the world for only 36 years. If you consider how long they lived in those days and how long their sojourn of this, trouble had been, 36 years seems like a very, very short time period to have waged this war and so on. It feels like nowadays we might go, well, that's a reasonable innings. Donald Trump's probably only going to get 8 years. Obama only had 8 years. 36 years seems like a pretty good innings. But actually, in Dwapara Yuga, where people might live for 1,000 years, 36 years is nothing. And now it became time for them to go to the forest, to go to the mountains in this case, to renounce the kingdom, to leave it in the hands of Arjuna's grandson, Parikshit. In fact, he was the only surviving descendant. The Pandavas' own children were all killed in the battle. Can you imagine how distressing? In fact, Parikshit was almost killed in the battle. The vindictive act of Ashvatthama was to send the equivalent of a nuclear weapon to wipe out the very remaining descendant of the Pandavas. Can you imagine how bitter and twisted a person would have to be to kill the unborn embryo like that, purely as a vindictive act? Ashvatthama had already killed all the other sons of the Pandavas, with the exception perhaps of Abhimanyu. And this was because his father, Drona, in his mind, had been killed unfairly, unjustly. He wanted vengeance. Vengeance is always a very, very problematic emotion, and it's very, very commonplace. I feel someone has wronged me, and in my mind, I now need to enact an act which causes them suffering. And this is a really, really problematic emotion, because nursing that resentment and that grievance, sometimes for many decades, one pollutes one's entire consciousness. Better to understand that whoever's caused me wrong is simply the agent of my own karma. I did something historically, maybe it's beyond my recollection, that meant this suffering is due to me. And this person was a particular agent. That doesn't excuse their actions, but let me leave any punishment to the laws of nature. I don't need to devote my life to seeing them suffer, to being vengeful. Anyway, this happened. So now the Pandavas are deciding we should give up our family life. Even though previously Arjuna had proposed that I should give up my duties as a Kshatriya and retire to the forest, and Krishna had criticized him, no, you're not ready for that. There's a duty to be done. Now it's sanctioned. Now, being older, the job of establishing a pious monarch having been accomplished, so now the Pandavas can relinquish there. They can move to the next stage. Beyond Grihastha life, there is Vanaprastha life. Actually, Kshatriyas don't take sannyas. Sannyas is exclusively for the Brahmana class. Sudras don't even take Vanaprastha. Sudra is the only Varna is marriage for a Sudra, Grihastha life. But the Pandavas in this case are now giving up their mundane responsibilities and now trying to dedicate themselves to the prosecution of spiritual life, and they're going to the forest. And this was Arjuna's saying something about his previous life. He's remembering the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It was only by Krishna's mercy that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from the chariot. So even though it was actually against the principles of Dharma to attack somebody who was not ready for fighting, like if someone's dismounted from the chariot and is going to get water, it would be inappropriate to attack them. This is why there was so much controversy around Arjuna's killing of Karna. Karna's wheel was stuck in the mud, and he got down from his chariot to try and rectify that situation. And Krishna said, now's the time to shoot him. Because apparently Karna was the superior warrior, and it may have been impossible for Arjuna to have actually killed him in open warfare. Now's the time, Krishna said. No, it's irreligious, said Arjuna. And where were the principles of religion when your son Abhimanyu was killed, said Krishna. And that was it. He tipped Arjuna over the edge, and Arjuna sent the arrow. So we can see principles of irreligion began to even come in during that battle of Kurukshetra. Things that had not previously been entertained in other ages of warfare crept in. Of course, Arjuna is the supreme, Krishna is a supreme pious person, so there's no immorality on his part. But these things are there for our education. Yudhishthira was told to lie, and he wanted to preserve his reputation as being a thoroughly honest man, and he put that ahead of Krishna's instruction to... And Yudhishthira hesitated, and for the first time in his life the wheels of his chariot touched the ground, because he was putting moral principles ahead of Krishna's directions. His own reputation of piety rather than his obedience to Krishna. And he came up with some little loophole. Ashwatthama, the elephant, has died. And Drona was distracted for a moment. And Arjuna? No, Drishtadyumna killed him. So again, another questionable act, because Drona was otherwise probably undefeatable. So all these things were going on. Here Arjuna is surprised that given all these transgressions, he was able to somehow successfully get down from his chariot and get his horses some water. And he's saying, maybe it was only by Krishna's mercy that my life was spared in this way. In fact, Krishna spared Arjuna's mercy and Arjuna's killing in many ways. There are many times Arjuna was in a very, very precarious position. One time, Arjuna was at Bhishma's mercy, and it was very obvious that Bhishma would finish. Bhishma being trained in the heavens to be the most fearsome warrior on the face of the planet. And Krishna got down from the chariot. Even he promised that he wouldn't be a combatant. And he picked up a chariot wheel and he charged at Bhishma. And Bhishma, obviously being a great devotee, but just from some intrigue, finding himself on the wrong side, was in ecstasy. Oh, I get to have a chivalrous exchange with Krishna. How wonderful. Look, even my arrows have pierced Krishna's skin. What a wonderful scrap. Now it's time for me to be vanquished by Krishna. Arjuna actually practically rugby tackled Krishna. We see that picture. No, don't break your promise, don't break your promise. So all these pastimes are going on. So Arjuna is reveling in these thoughts. How is it that I was spared? And then he's expressing regret. How is it that I engage my friend, my superior, my elder, in becoming my charioteer? A charioteer is a pretty rough job. You're likely to be hit by stray arrows, even if you're not supposed to be attacked. As they say in the movies, the chauffeur's always the one who gets it first. So a charioteer is essentially the chauffeur of the warrior. The warrior's in the back, in the chariot itself, and the charioteer's in the front, dust being kicked up by the horses, taking care of the horses, even though Arjuna here is getting the water. The charioteer, the Sutta, it's a Sudra profession. One of the insults that was hurled at Karna was Sutaputra. You're the son of a charioteer. You're not a Kshatriya. Because his father was also Abhimanyu? A different Abhimanyu? What was the name of Karna's father? So, yeah, his stepfather. Atirak. So you're the son of of course people didn't know actually he was the son of Kunti and the sun god. So they rubbished his reputation. You're the son of a Sudra. You're not a king. You're not a Kshatriya. And these caused him great pain. So Arjuna's thinking, how is it that I've taken my Lord, Krishna, my friend, and engaged him in this humble occupation, this lowly occupation? He's regretting. Of course, Krishna does this out of love. Krishna loved Arjuna so much that he became his humble servant in that regard. And as Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, maybe the devotee couldn't forget from time to time to hold Krishna in the highest esteem, because that facilitates the flow of intimacy. That Mother Mangal can tease Krishna. That Mother Jashoda or Nanda Maharaj can chastise Krishna. So that they can experience that intimate relationship. So here are some thoughts on this verse and purport. Srila Prabhupada ki. There might be 1 or 2 minutes for questions or additional comments. Srila Prabhupada ki.